Hey guys, welcome back to Mondays at the Museum. I'm Carrie and I'm here at the Anna B. Miss Palmer Museum in York, Nebraska. So for today's video, we're going to be talking about Lushton, Nebraska. Lushton is south-ish to the city of York, about 6 miles south of I-80. For its beginning, because so many of our county towns start out with railroad history, it is the same. A railroad was laid out in the area in the spring of 1887 and Lushton followed. The land came from a guy named W.J. Walters. A post office was opened August 6, 1887, and it was actually named after William Lush. He was a Burlington Railroad official, and like I said, because so many of our counties are dependent on the railroad and it being laid out, they went with Lushton in his honor, and then it sort of became the name of the town as well as the post office. Current population of Lushton is 28, so don't feel bad if you haven't heard of it. I'm going to teach you about it today. So on to the fun facts. So the first church in all of Lushton was the United Brethren Church. It started in 1888, and actually it was active until 1983, which is quite the feat. It had a building in the country, which they moved to town for the church. There was also a Methodist church and a community Bible church, which I think is still active today. The Lushton Cemetery Association has interesting history on its own. First off, the land came from a guy named Peter Purcell who moved to York County in 1872. First burial took place right away in 1872. But at one point, people thought that this cemetery, and it was recognized as a national cemetery, they thought that this was the smallest national cemetery in the entire USA, which I'm not sure if that's actually still true, but at one time that's what people thought. I do know, and this is really cool, they have a special section there in the Lushton Cemetery where if you served in the armed forces, regardless of your beliefs or your sexuality or your, religion, anything like that, as long as you served, you can be buried there, no questions asked. I think that's really neat. I wish more cemeteries would do that. I guess very few do. Right now there's around 30-ish, maybe a couple less, veterans that are buried there. There's also a large GAR statue right next to those military burials of C.W. Hayes, and that's who their GAR post was named after. There's also a plaque for World War II memorial there on site as well, which is really cool. So back to Lushton itself, there are a couple of really big fires that sort of stunted its growth. Let's go with that. And unfortunately, they took place like on the opposite sides of the square, so that both sides were damaged. One was in 1913 and another was in 1926. Interesting things that we don't really talk about so much anymore. Lushton had 2 ice houses at one point. Ice was cut from a pond. It was called Sloniger's Pond. If I'm butchering the pronunciation, I apologize for that. So Sloniger's Pond. And then it was hauled by wagon team into town and then packed into clean straw where it was stored. Lushton did have a school at one point, but the last class graduated in 1949, and eventually it was torn down in 1964. And they also had a bandstand right by the main intersection where bands would play every Friday night, but it's kind of faded away over time. And I think the highest population was like in the early 1910s, and that's sort of when it was incorporated as well. But it's really gotten smaller over time. Like I said, current population is 28. So keep that in mind. When I show you our Lushton area, it's a little small, but it's a small town. However, it still has a lot of history. So I'm going to show you our Lushton area of the York County History Display. All right, so here is the section overall. So here's a rather large picture of Lushton, Nebraska, and what's really cool is if you look really closely, you can see a steam engine there, but it looks like a pretty snowy day. We do have a lot of other photos. Here is one, that's like the Methodist church there that's on the right, but this is Lushton there in 1920. And then we have a couple things from the centennial. There's a picture there, so 1887 through 1987. And then this little flyer, it says, "Don't bother with business. It's time you should play. Come on to Lushton and stay for a day." So it says August 29th. So that must have been the day of the centennial. Here's a photo of that GAR memorial. And like I said, it's of Hayes there, that statue. We have a collection. So this is early days of Lushton from the York Daily News Times, and it's from 1970. So there's that snowy photo that I showed you earlier. Here is Main Street. So that says it was about 1910. We got a stable here. Check all those horses. Here's the United Brethren Church. That was that first church that was established in 1888. We have the school. Again, it was torn down in the 60s, but here it was in 1910. Here's a building that caught fire and kind of the onlookers surrounding it. They had a hotel once upon a time. It was called Hotel Lushton. There's a photo of that. Here's another copy of that picture there with the church over there from 1920. And then the depot. Up on the wall, we have this awesome apron, the Monarch Cement Company, and then it says it's from Lushton Lumber Company. If you look at the back of the apron, it's got like the leg ties that go behind your legs. And then this P.K. Moore drugstore, so that says that it was established in 1887. And I don't know if you can tell, but that is actually a canvas, and it is like all we have left of that canvas. There was a big windstorm, I guess, and it tore up, and this is what they were able to save. So P.K. Moore drugs, paints, wallpaper since 1887. And right below it, we have a picture of the interior of the store, and you can see P.K. Moore right there in the middle. But it says P.K. Moore drugstore above was one of Lushton's earliest and oldest firms. Check out all that inventory there. So that is the highlights version of the history of Lushton, Nebraska, and a quick view at our Lushton area. It is small, but it's a small town, so we're going with it. It might be a small town, but it's still got large history. So tune in next week. We're going to be talking about Charleston, Nebraska. Speaking of small towns, Charleston is so small it's not even around anymore. However, did you know that there was a guy from Charleston that won the Kentucky Derby? I'll tell you more about it next week. We'll see you then.